We're the travel agents coming to you with tips, tricks, interviews, and voyages by cruise. The travel agents bringing you the latest travel news.
Je m'appelle Brian.
Je m'appelle Will.
Hey, we're your hosts for the Travel Agents Podcast. Will, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I think I was sharing with you earlier. My chiropractor says I need to readjust my spine, so I got a standing desk at work.
Nice, dude.
Yeah.
Okay. How are you liking it?
Well, I just hit my second full day standing for 8 straight hours. Okay. My spine feels great. Now my feet ache.
Got to get those pads.
I bought a fatigue pad.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
It's coming tomorrow morning.
Dude, that'll make a huge difference. Good for you, man.
Thanks. I was just realizing the older you get, the more your life just becomes consistent Amazon purchases to make aches and pains go away and somehow try to make yourself healthier. And you don't really know if it's working or not, but this is us.
This is us, and we're not sponsored by ABC. So you just got back from Africa.
Yes.
We're not talking about those trips yet, but we're talking about a special country on the western side of Africa. What are we talking about today?
It's called Senegal. Do you know anything about it, Will?
All I know about Senegal is the football. Sadio Mane, Kalidou Koulibaly, the legends of West Africa. That's about it. That's all I know.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Africa, what we really need to do, first off, the amount of African knowledge for most Americans is so low. It's it can be embarrassing. Even it was for me years ago. I'm a travel agent, so I can't use that excuse. I don't know. But Africa is a giant continent. In case there are some, I'm still meeting adults who think oh, South Africa. So is that like a region?
Yeah, right.
It's a country.
Yeah.
But Africa's super diverse. So I've gotten to travel to South Africa. I've gotten to travel to Morocco. Now Egypt and Ethiopia, super different. So you can't just say oh, I think I know what goes on in Africa. Must be animals and safaris. No, that's a very specific region. This region that we're going to talk about is unique because it's on the western side of, I don't know if it's called the Horn, maybe so, but it's on the far west. And I think usually when you think of northern Africa or west or northwestern Africa, the key word that should come into mind is French.
Yeah.
A lot of French speaking places over here. And so if you have a background in French or you studied French in school, that's actually going to be very helpful when you're traveling. But since you and I know next to nothing about this country except that the capital is, go ahead,
Dakar.
And the airport code is DSS, as in Delta, Sierra. That's about it. So we have a guest joining us. He is a dear friend of mine. Known him for maybe 5 or more years or so. He is a professor of art history works at Kent State University. He's been featured on multiple other podcasts. He is a teacher that actually takes students around the world with him. Also to New York City, which is kind of cool. I would like to do that trip with him sometime.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
But Travel Agent Podcast listeners, please welcome Dr. Joseph Underwood.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
It's great to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with Senegal.
Sure. So in my specialization for my doctorate, I focus on Senegalese art, mostly the post-colonial era. Most African nations gained their independence around 1960. And so what did culture do in those foundational decades to liberate the mind, to liberate the people, to imagine a new sense of identity, whether that's nationality, race, but then also think about 80s and 90s, we've got globalization. So now how do we, this newly liberated people, fit in with the rest of the world? And I study that through art and how the artists make networks and how they travel and how they describe themselves and where they come from. So I just get to tell a lot of stories.
That's amazing. So how many times have you been to Senegal?
I went earlier in 2022, and that was my 8th trip.
Oh my gosh.
Man,
I had no idea.
It's very much a home away from home. It's very easy to go back. I have long-term friends there, artists that now I've followed their career for over a decade. And, you get to know them and you see their work evolve. And then it's like I have the immense honor through my lectures and exhibitions I curate and publications I write to give their work a platform and situate it within larger global networks.
Before we get into our defining words, let's address something that some listeners need to hear now before they can even continue listening. And that is if they were to travel to Senegal, safety, language, is it crowded? What's it going to be like? Just a little bit about that.
Sure. So Senegal is in West Africa. Dakar, the capital, is actually on a peninsula sticking out into the ocean. So it is the closest point on the African continent to the Americas. It's only 4 time zones different from the eastern United States, which makes it really easy to travel. It's like jet lag is very minimal. And there are direct flights from
Washington, D.C.?
and New York City.
All right.
So it's pretty great. It's a 7-hour flight, and bam, you're in West Africa.
Cool.
Senegal is just below the Sahel Desert, so it is kind of bridging that cultural divide that the desert provides. And it's one of the safest countries in West Africa. It's one of the easiest to visit. Yes, some French would be helpful. Wolof is the local indigenous language, and if you get at least some basic greetings, then you'd be fine there. English, you're good in the downtown area, and of course, any service industries like hotel, travel. But I'd bring your French phrase book with you to get along.
Sure. The population of Senegal is 17 million. The population of Dakar is about 1.15 million.
Nice.
Yeah, it's definitely grown in the last few years. It's one of the reasons the airport moved from Dakar to a city an hour away. So you used to be able to fly right into downtown, and now it's a little schlep.
I bet that happened with Iceland too. Because Reykjavik does have an airport right downtown. It's 6 minutes from downtown. 6 minutes.
So the naval base that was stationed in Keflavik, my parents were stationed in Keflavik, so I think like that's kind of where everything was like originating. And
Sure.
Yeah, so
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you might see some of that stuff in Africa. Yeah. Man, okay, so 8 times in Senegal, you are sort of our local expert here. So we're excited to jump into it. Let's talk about our defining words.
Here's 3 words to help you. Here's our defining words.
Okay, Joseph, what is your first word?
The first word is Teranga.
Okay, do tell.
Yeah, Teranga is actually a Wolof word, and you'll hear it as soon as you get there. Everyone uses it. It's one of the country's badges of honor. Teranga roughly translates to hospitality.
Oh.
They are so excited to welcome people, even though it's it's not super religiously diverse. It's 95% Muslim. There have been no notable religious conflicts. There's a great understanding for the Catholic minority that lives there. It's kind of an exemplar in West Africa for harmony. And so they are very proud to show off their cuisine, their culture, their monuments, their beaches to whoever comes. And so that Teranga is kind of a hallmark of Senegal.
Wow. That seems really bad. Do you feel that like, for example, whenever I talk about Greece, I say Athens is a great city, but if you want that true Greek hospitality, that true Greek, the cuisine, the culture, you got to get to the islands, got to get away from Athens. When it comes to Senegal, I'm just curious, do you feel that even in Dakar, which is probably where clients would fly into and where they would spend time, do you feel it's still evident there, or is that kind of rougher because it's a city?
It's pretty universal. Yeah, it pervades kind of all classes and neighborhoods. I've actually I've almost kind of consciously have stayed in different neighborhoods each time I've gone back to Dakar.
Nice.
And, some are more touristy, some are more local, some are kind of like the fisherman, area. And every time I've felt perfectly welcome. People are excited to see you and talk about their daily life and what they're proudest of for where they are in the city.
Well, Teranga all around. Word number 2?
Coastal.
Sure.
It is, like I said, Dakar, the city, is on a peninsula. So much of the city is coastal. There are beaches that go all the way around. Most are actually not that swimmable. There are some kind of polluting issues, but it's also very actively fished. So you have to go to a very specific place to kind of go into the water. But everywhere you are gorgeous views of the Atlantic as kind of the backdrop. The city itself is very dusty. There's not a ton of plants. The desiccation, the kind of drying out of Africa is an issue, right? The desert moving down. And depending when you go in the year, if it's The rainy season, which is when you really don't want to go, that's kind of like July to November is kind of the low travel season. And then December to May is kind of the high travel season. You're going to get incredible weather. It is daily the exact same temperature. It's 78 degrees, and then at night it's 70. Every day, no chance of rain, zero chance of rain for those 6 months. So
That's nice.
it's really,
that's pretty nice.
It's very predictable.
Not very green.
So do you have like some winds coming from like the Sahara coming down to kind of like increase that dustiness?
It can be very windy coming off the ocean, coming from the north. So coastal, in Dakar, they actually have what's called the Corniche. That's the main highway. They have really nice roads, actually, in Dakar. And so when you're driving along the coast of this whole peninsula, right, all three sides of what stick out, you're getting this kind of the view of the endless ocean. There are some kind of really historic buildings, and then they've even put a new monument that opened in 2010. It's taller than the Statue of Liberty, of these like three African figures looking out over the ocean. So it's just kind of striking.
Cool.
It's the African Renaissance monument.
Wow. Are those figures like anyone in particular, or are they just sort of similar to the Statue of Liberty?
Right. They kind of represent a generic family.
Okay.
It's a husband, a wife, and a small child. It's very kind of almost a Soviet realist style monument, super heroic looking.
Well, this is sweet.
Oh, wow. That's
that.
really cool. You guys got to look that up.
Yeah.
And it kind of points out over the Atlantic Ocean to talk about the Africans who have left, whether kind of through the transatlantic slave trade or through globalization and diaspora, people moving for jobs or school. So just kind of that wanting to connect across the ocean. So, I mean, when you're along this Corniche, you're seeing all the beautiful hotels, buildings. They've installed all the kind of sculptures and gardens and kind of public parks where you can exercise. It's just it's very walkable and beautiful. I mean, that's where all the fishermen are gathered too.
So being on a coast and having a huge coastline, I would imagine that majority of the cuisine is going to involve seafood.
It sure is.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, being 95% Muslim, you don't have certain meats and things that you might find elsewhere. So be sure to grab those in the airport before you go to Senegal.
Sure. What's your third defining word?
The third word is religious. It's a very pious place. Everyone is very proud of their religion and happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
They're equally happy to listen to you talk about yours. But, don't expect to go anywhere on Friday afternoon when the entire town shuts down for Friday prayers. If you go to the campus, Sheikh Anta Diop University is over 60,000 students. It's one of the largest universities in West Africa. You kind of get stuck if you are in the wrong place. You're trying to walk somewhere because everyone's out and doing that really important prayer. So from the cuisine to the culture to even how people dress, right? It's very modest dress. Everyone's bodies are fully covered, but it's also the most incredible fashion. Like you feel like a schlub walking around Dakar because everyone is dressed to the nines most days.
Sure. Okay, like could I wear just nice clothes that I have, or like are they wearing more traditional clothes that look different than what I have here?
Right, they're wearing like they call them mostly like boo-boos, right? Like it's like the men are wearing pants and then like a long almost tunic like thing, but they're always very bright colors.
Yeah.
The women, incredible head wraps and things. People totally wear Western dress, but I would generally avoid things like shorts or short skirts, things like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Is there like kind of an expectation or not necessarily an expectation, but maybe a cultural understanding that if you're a Western and you're coming there, like to dress in sort of Senegalese style, or is it kind of typical to like dress in a Western manner?
Oh yeah, no, I think people tend to just be wearing button downs or things like that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's that expectation. I mean, the Senegalese are also wearing that. There's this incredible kind of fusion of fashions. Mm-hmm. But in terms of what you visit, you might visit the kind of incredible mosques. Some of the cities are really significant, like Touba.
Sure.
One of the sects of Islam is Sufism, and Senegal is one of the main centers of that. And Sheikh Amadou Bamba, who's one of the kind of great prophets, was Senegalese, and he was, Touba was an important city to him, and so people do annual pilgrimages. So just kind of in terms of even what you would do as a tourist, the religion is going to come into play, whether it's timing your meals correctly or avoiding busy places or knowing that the religious sites are actually some of the most incredible things you can visit. Like, yeah, Brian, you mentioned Morocco. I don't know if you've been to some of the like huge mosques they have there.
No, in Rabat, I did not get to go to that main mosque that I was supposed to go to.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of pride, right? Like how we might compete with our football stadiums or things, like which city has the best. I think there's some of that going on with mosques in Africa.
American football.
Yes.
We have no idea what soccer stadiums are. Columbus Crew, map-free stadium. I know one. Hooray.
So I would imagine, sometimes in Middle Eastern countries, non-believers aren't necessarily allowed to go into mosques. Is this same situation in Senegal?
I would say it's the same situation.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I want to hear your highs and lows.
Sometimes things are good, sometimes they're bad too. It's highs, lows coming to you.
What's your high?
Well, I have a couple. Of course, you're asking an art historian. So the first one is it's got incredible culture. Senegal, there's this kind of lore that the first president, Leopold Senghor, he was a poet. And so that's this kind of unique thing, right? Like your first president of an independent nation is a poet, right? And so 25% of this brand new nation's budget was going to the Ministry of Culture and Education. Can you imagine 1 out of every 4 government dollars in the U.S. going to culture/education? So, from the first World Festival of Black Arts in 1966 to some incredible new museums and exhibitions, there's just been a lot of government support for art, and it's led to this incredible legacy where you can envision a career as an artist. And there's several kind of institutions that lend themselves to that. For example, the Biennial. It's an exhibition that reoccurs every 2 years in the same place. The most famous is probably Venice, started in 1895. And so the whole world flocks to Venice every 2 years to see like what's going on with art. The one in Dakar is the longest running one in Africa and the most significant for developing, launching the careers of African artists. So, like I said, I've been 8 times. It's mostly going back for that biennial because people are gathering from all across Africa and the diaspora to talk about art and culture for Africa.
How long does that event usually happen? Like you said, it's pretty long. Is there like a particular like week that it's always this week, or maybe like thereabout? Exactly.
I mean, I recommend anyone can just show up to it. Like you don't even have to be that much of an art expert. It is always around May 10th to June 10th to catch that perfect weather.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have like a whole month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. The first week tends to be all the opening parties. So this art event, it is focused on contemporary art, right? Like art being made right now by Black and African people from around the world. There's a main exhibition, normally of about 100 artists, that's been curated by like a big name curator. And then there are 300 to 400 exhibitions scattered throughout the city of varying scale. So everywhere you turn during that month, even the restaurant you're in, the hotel you're staying at, like the lobbies, the back rooms, the gas stations have all been turned into art galleries. And so it's just like if you enjoy art or any kind of, visual expression, you would love this event.
Well, not only is Joseph an art curator for Kent State, he also is a collector. So if you ever get to go to his home, you see some very fun African art. And I mean like really fun.
I bet.
Yeah, it's always rewarding when you've made a relationship with an artist and then you get to live with them in a sense.
Yeah. And then you order it and it shows up after 8 months.
Customs. I'm kidding. The other thing I'd recommend in terms of a high for art is they have what's called the Village des Arts, or the Village of Arts. And that's where there are about 40 artist studios where artists live, and you can visit any day and just kind of pop in, and they expect people to be coming through. It's a residency space, and you have to apply to get a spot. But if you want to see artists in action or just talk to them, it's a really neat place to swing by.
Nice.
Interesting. Okay. I'm trying to like relate it to anything maybe in like the States that people may have come across. Like, because this sounds, I don't know, it seems extremely unique, but I can't think of anything other than maybe like a fashion week in New York or LA. Mm-hmm. Maybe it seems like there's a similar sense of pride like that you might find in like New Orleans during like Mardi Gras, sort of that like celebration of life, and there's so much color and vibrancy, and there is such a artistic approach to the celebration of Mardi Gras with jazz and all these other elements. I don't know. Have you ever like been in New Orleans? Is there like a comparable comparison there?
There sure is, actually. Yeah, New Orleans also has a triennial, so an exhibition every 3 years instead of 2. And it's very similar to the idea of any kind of festival, I would say, is when you've gathered people for a dedicated week or 2 weeks to celebrate some kind of event. And I think another kind of connection is that it also tends to expand beyond the visual arts. Like when you're having the biennial in Dakar, there's also this whole huge concert program, and there's concerts every night. And then there's kind of traditional music being played at these venues. And, the arts do intersect.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Man. Wow. It was almost like you guys planned that.
Almost.
Connecting New Orleans and Dakar.
Yeah.
Okay. Enough art talk. How cheap is it?
Cheap. I mean, the conversion rate obviously is very strong if you're coming in with the euro or the US dollar. The CFA is the currency, CFA is the abbreviation, and it is historically tied to the French franc. So now it is part of the BCEAO, the kind of Bank of West Africa, and they're all tied together.
How often do you fly out there with just one check bag and a backpack, but then fly home with an extra carry-on bag for the overhead bin with souvenirs because you just wanted to buy so much stuff?
Yeah, it happens. Yeah. I mean, I'm also bringing back books. I'm bringing back all these things you can't get on Amazon delivered to your doorstep to help your ailing feet and back.
Very interesting. You live an interesting life, Joseph.
I sure do.
Before the lows, any other highs?
Yeah, I'd say the quick other high point would be the history.
Yeah.
I mean, can the art historian talk about art and history? So
you get 1 minute.
for history, you talked about it being so central to you talked about it being central to the French kind of colonial enterprise. Senegal was actually the capital of all of what was called French West Africa. And so the buildings are largely in French style because this is where the French expats lived. If you go to a city like St. Louis, which is a day trip away, it is very historic, going back to the 14th, 15th century. Some of the first contact between Africa and Europe, like the Portuguese, and then it traded hands back and forth, right? The French ultimately ended up with it. But St. Louis is a sister of St. Louis in the United States, and they're all kind of tied back to this French history. St. Louis is another coastal city. They have an annual jazz festival, and just kind of really incredible historic colonial buildings, largely in decay, but it might kind of remind you of Venice, right? Where it's like the city's kind of sinking, but it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
So between that and the history of things like the slave trade, right? People going to Gorée Island, President Obama famously, swung by the Maison des Esclaves, the slave house, because a lot of people would be gathered up from the African mainland and held on the islands until the boats could come pick them up to take them to the Americas. So
what was that island? Sorry, real quick. What was that island?
That island's Gorée, Goree, and it's a beautiful day trip out there from Dakar. So depending, the history goes back centuries, whether it's kind of indigenous or the way that the colonial enterprise happened to all the intersections now with other global networks.
Love it.
You kind of just take like a ferry to the island.
Yep. It's a 40-minute ferry.
Nice.
I'm interested because you love this country. You're passionate about it. And Will and I always find it difficult to try to find a low, especially when we love a place. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything for us?
I do. So malaria is actually still kind of endemic. The very first time I went with some, kind of a team of people, and day 2, someone contracted malaria.
Oh.
So it does happen.
It was so much more severe than I thought. I thought he was going to be like, there's no Reese's Cups. Can you believe that? 2 weeks without it? And you're just like, malaria.
I mean, you're right. There's the couple different pills, and Dakar, to be fair, is very low contagion rate. I haven't taken malaria medication the last 4 trips. So yeah. I think it depends. If you're going out to more rural Senegal, I would highly recommend it. If you're staying in Dakar, going to St. Louis, you could probably get away with it, but your doctor is going to recommend it.
Speaking of malaria, do you know if you have to have a yellow fever shot to get in Senegal?
I don't know if you have to have one, but I do or
Okay.
did. I think I just got the second one.
Good reason to use a travel agent. We go to the CDC. We find out what's mandatory and what's also recommended, and these are things we even have a contact here in Northeast Ohio that we send you to go get your shots.
Mm-hmm. The other low I'll share is if you are vegetarian or vegan, you will have a very difficult time navigating.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Wow, okay.
everything has fish paste, fish oil, or other meats like goat is kind of one of the main meats
Yeah,
there.
Sure.
So if you're trying to avoid dairy or meat, you'll get a lot of confused looks. You might be able to get some rice, but even then you'll need to ask, what sauces or things have been put in.
Sure. Do you have a favorite Senegalese dish?
I love chiboujen.
Chiboujen.
Chiboujen, it starts with a T and ends with an E, so good luck spelling it.
I was gonna ask.
But it's a fish dish, and it's on a spicy rice with some very specific root vegetables. They tend to only traditionally you only prepare it one day a week. Now there's restaurants you can order it every day, but if you're in any kind of away from the touristy areas, they're like, oh no, we don't have it. Come back Thursday. That's when we'll have chiboujen. And it is worth it. I will tell you, they give you the whole fish on a plate. You gotta peel all the skin and bones and everything off, but it is one of the most well-spiced things. They use a ton of onions in their cuisine. Chiboujen.
The national dish of Senegal.
It sure is.
Man. Yeah, this looks amazing. I looked it up. Yeah, you weren't kidding. It's very difficult to spell. It's kind of got like a Cajun spelling to it almost, but just look up national dish of Senegal. I'm sure it'll pop up.
I wasn't even close, and I didn't get it.
Looks delicious.
Okay, next time. Let's see. We talked about our highs. Any other lows? You're good? Well, you whet everyone's appetite for some very cool things to see and do in Senegal. Now we want to hear your tips so we don't act a fool.
Tips from the travel agents.
So the first tip I kind of alluded to earlier, the brand new airport just opened a couple years ago, and it is an hour away from Dakar. So budget that in when you're trying to get somewhere. The only way to really get there at this point is by taxi. There is plans for a train, and the train station in Dakar was just renovated, and it's supposed to connect all across West Africa. It'll be really exciting if and when that becomes a very kind of regular thing.
It looked like all the taxis in one video I watched looked pretty old and dated and had no air conditioning.
Yeah, so all the taxis are secondhand from Europe, and they do come pretty beat up. Sometimes it's kind of a nice thin piece of aluminum between your feet and the street, but I've never had any issues. And there is I'd say even in the last couple trips I've done, an uptick in the amount of taxis that are a little newer and have AC. But yeah, bring a hand fan.
Sure. That's good. All right.
So get yourself from the airport to the city. You are going to take taxis everywhere. The bus system is very complicated. And then there's the car rapides. Those are the beautiful, famous, really colorful buses that go around Senegal. But it's all in Wolof, and you're not going to get where you're trying to go. So as a foreigner, every time I would say take a taxi. And you can also get from one end of Dakar to the other, which might take an hour, and still spend $8. So just take the taxi. And there are no set rates. So you do have to haggle every time you get into a taxi. They will ask for
Now, hold on a second.
$20 the first time.
Here's one thing that we're not gonna. It's not gonna be fair. Joseph is super good at French. I'm willing to bet when you haggle or chat with anyone or buy anything, you just switch to French, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's
all in
easy.
French. Yeah.
We should probably take a step back. How's your French, Will?
Pretty bad. I think I know maybe 15 words.
Yeah, I think I'm about 20 because I've been doing it on Duolingo for like 8 months. Yeah, what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, people, you can resort to your hands or actually just holding up the money that you want to offer because they'll be saying, 10 mille, 8 mille, 8 mille, because it's in the thousands, right? Which like, not
Oh,
only are you in
yeah,
a foreign
good
language,
luck.
you're in these like huge numbers,
Yeah,
which is always
sure.
confusing.
Actually,
Especially in
meal is
French.
easy because I knew meal means 1,000.
Yeah, but I mean, depending on the day, the rough equation is 500 seifa is $1.
That's
So
nice.
one meal, right? $2. So,
Okay.
and depending on your budget, even if they ask you for a D meal, $10,000, it's $20. Do you have $20? Like, you might just be fine with that.
Sure.
And that applies everywhere. If you're at any of the famous markets like Sandaga or Koloban, and you want to get some clothes or some African textiles or any of the kind of hand-carved crafts or kind of artisanal things, it's all negotiated. There is never a set price.
You know, one thing I started doing in my travels, which has been actually kind of relieving, but I think a lot of people are going to cringe. I just accepted the fact that I'm a foreigner and a tourist, and I'm going to pay the tourist price. And I finally just said, okay.
Right. Yeah.
And then the moment you leave, they're like, how much did you pay? The local asks you that, and you tell them, and they're like, oh, you could have got it for lower. I'm like, yeah.
Right. No, I hear you.
You could have. I couldn't. I didn't want to. I want to make this guy's week.
So what are your some of your favorite areas in Dakar? Things to do in Dakar,
Right.
in the capital city?
So definitely the kind of historic downtown area. It's called the Plateau, right? Just means like the flat area. It's got the kind of one big Catholic church, which has this incredible painting on the ceiling of all these kind of black Africans reaching toward Christ. So between that, which is kind of the one religious structure you can enter, right, as a foreigner, it has all of the museums, the national galleries. It has a museum dedicated to the history of war. I definitely recommend going to Gorée Island, which is still part of Dakar, as a day trip. You can see some incredible 16th, 17th century colonial houses, like really beautifully, kind of like Venice painted colors.
Okay.
Sandaga Market is one of the historic markets. Get some fresh fruit. Mangoes is one of the main exports of Senegal, along with peanuts.
Ooh.
So if you want a real mango, you buy them on the street for 20 cents, and they are the freshest mango you've ever had.
Ooh. What about in Senegal proper? Are there anything in particular with Senegal that you would really love to do when you're outside of Dakar, sort of the coast?
Yeah, so I mentioned Saint Louis. That's a great day trip. They also have a new museum of African photography. And then there is the Pink Lake, the Lac Rose. It's a really high salt content lake that looks pink when you see all these beautiful birds around it. So that's kind of a really neat, if you want to get out and see some nature. Anytime you leave Dakar and are driving to these various places, you'll see the baobab tree. If you don't know much about baobab trees, look up a picture, because they
Super
have
cool.
really thick trunks. And these trees can be hundreds of years old. And this is another national symbol of Senegal.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, those things are super cool. They look alien to us Americans, because we don't see trees like that at all.
Yeah, one of the main juices they drink comes from baobab. You can make baobab candy. The other juice you have to try is bisop, which is basically hibiscus juice.
Ooh.
So it's like hibiscus tea, but it's got so much sugar added that it's sweet.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, the cuisine is incredible in Senegal. You will never be in a shortage of variety of dishes to try.
Is it a great place? A lot of times you think Africa immediately, to the normal layperson, they're going to ask, oh yeah, safaris. Senegal, is it a good place for a safari? You're going to see a lot of really cool animals.
So in Senegal, there are some regions that have kind of preserves where you can go on a safari, see some animals. Mbour, Mbour, is a city, I think it's 3 or 4 hours away from Dakar, and it's kind of known as a resort city. You can go do some of the water sports like parasailing and surfing and that kind of stuff. And near Mbour, there is a national preserve where you can see some animals. But a lot of the animals you think of when you think of Africa are not actually indigenous to this part of Africa. So even the animals you see there aren't necessarily local ones.
Sure,
But
sure.
you want to see some monkeys, hyenas, zebras.
Camels.
No.
Okay.
It's close enough to the Sahara.
I would say
It's pretty
head
close to
north.
Sahara.
There's plenty of them.
Sure.
What about like, because okay, if you guys aren't familiar with Senegal and sort of the geography of Senegal, there is a country kind of just jutting inside of Senegal, and that's the Gambia. Like, how easy can you kind of go into the Gambia, like on a day trip? Is it pretty easy to get into, or?
It's going to take you a couple days to get there. I was kind of mentioning these new highways that were in Dakar and are connecting the new airport. But beyond that, you're going to be taking buses and they leave at very particular times, or you're hiring a driver to take you all the way. Gambia and Senegal do have a somewhat contentious relationship. There was at one point the Senegambia, right? And as part of the fallout of colonialism with all of these artificial lines that Europeans drew in Africa to create nations. Okay, great. We've pulled out. You're all independent nations. Like, figure it out. So, they're. Is
that what happened?
Mm-hmm.
I get it now.
Yeah.
That's why it was always changing. Like my grandpa still has maps in the office, right? From like the 1940s, 50s, 60s.
That'd be cool.
It is so, you can't besides Egypt, everything in South Africa, everything's different.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, the way that the Berlin Conference in 1884, it was all the European powers sitting around a table, not even on the African continent. And they drew lines and they were like, this is yours, this is mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it cut across rivers. It cut across people groups.
Did like the one guy let his son, you draw a line, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
That's like it's kind of one of the same things that happened in the Middle East. One of the key reasons ISIS kind of like developed a following was because like, hey, we want to establish like these pre-existing lines that were kind of just thrown apart. And the sort of geography and the lines that were created to create these countries is a really interesting history because, you're kind of just totally disregarding a lot of tribes and a lot of like history. And like you said, like even the rivers and stuff like that. It's really crazy.
Right. So, I mean, there are literally hundreds of ethnic groups, linguistic groups, cultural groups, and none of these were the factors when deciding these new borders. So there's been a lot of kind of upheaval, and you might hear, right, like, there's been another coup in Africa in that nation. And right, it's like these nations are 50, 60 years old, and they are very much in the infancy stage. And we're left with all these issues of like, oh, right, this new nation is actually two people groups that never got along historically, but now they're a nation and they have to like, who are we going to vote to be the president? So,
right. It's crazy. Very interesting stuff.
For our standby items, I just have 14 quick questions.
Oh, great. Rapid fire.
You want to move into standby items? Do you have any other tips for us?
I think that covers most of it.
All right, let's talk about standby items.
It's safety and other info with standby items. Here we go.
So, like, one thing I know about predominantly Muslim countries is, talking about religion is not taboo. You can totally talk about God, the Quran, the Bible, and it's like Jesus. It's totally fine. How about politics? Is that something you bring up over there, or is it like, no, they're kind of weird about their politics, don't even talk about it?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, so there are a couple of main political parties, and power is very centralized in that way. A lot of the conversations I have, of course, are with artists, and they do not outright critique any particular government or individual or regime. They kind of talk, in very roundabout ways about it. So I think that would be a pretty good topic to avoid, right? Yeah. You can ask about industries, ask about how things are going, but I also don't really have a platform to speak to.
Sure. Alcohol.
Good question. Of course, most people are abstaining from alcohol in Senegal since it's 95% Muslim. You will find it in the restaurants and the hotels that cater to European expat audiences. Sure. I would say there has been a little bit of a loosening in the last decade of alcohol around the country, but Dakar and the main cities are where you're going to find it. Good luck even finding a beer in the more rural areas.
So stick to your nice hotel restaurant for your glass of wine.
Yeah.
Okay. For our female listeners, clothing for them, anything they should watch out for or be careful for?
Right. I mean, definitely I wouldn't show too much skin. It is a modesty issue. You might get proposed to a time or two from taxi drivers or other people, and they're not necessarily joking. So, you can laugh, but be sure to say no.
Okay. Or in French?
No.
There you go.
No, merci.
How about, do you have any idea, do you get an overall sense of their thoughts of America?
I'd say overall, people in Senegal really like the United States. They do consume some of our media and fashion, especially sports are very popular there. They'll know some of our basketball players and American football players. I think it's a very positive relationship. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that they are so close to us. Like I said, it's a 7-hour flight to Senegal. And so there are a ton of Senegalese people in New York City. I'd say that's kind of the main kind of landing point in the U.S., but
Cool.
I mean, they're all over the place.
This next question is one I'm always interested in. You may or may not know it. Do you know who their immigrants are? Who's immigrating to? Would they be emigrant? Would they be emigrating, or they would be immigrating?
Mm-hmm. Immigrating.
Who's immigrating to Senegal?
Oh, I mean, in general, I would say Dakar is a more affluent city in West Africa. So you will have people coming from Gabon, Dahomey, Togo, I'd say the surrounding nations. And then people from Senegal, if they're moving within Africa, they tend to be moving north, toward Morocco.
Sure.
So I'd say those are some of the flow of people.
Okay. So I did just see that for U.S. citizens, no visa is needed, just a passport.
Yeah, it's a very easy process.
That's nice. How about electric? What kind do you have a converter unit or a adapter?
It's the same as I use in France. So,
the European plug.
Right.
Yeah.
Since that, there's so many cultural kind of connections between the two.
Sure.
You're good with any of your European converters adapters.
Which is the 220, I believe, because we use 110 here, correct, Will? Yeah. We use 110, they use 220. That's not important. Cash. It seems like it's a cash culture. Especially if you're going to buy some stuff on the street, you need cash. They're not going to maybe one out of every 50 will take credit card, but
I mean, there has been a shift in the last couple trips I've done in terms of taking credit card. It's very minimal.
Okay.
It is almost exclusively cash. Almost even at the nice restaurants, you need to have cash. And the tricky part is that if you go to an ATM, you get these $10,000 bills, right? Because you're taking out a bunch.
Yes.
And for most of your exchanges with people on the street, right? You're buying a mango, it's going to be 400 sefa, not even 1,000. And so no one wants to break your big $10,000 bill in daily life Senegal. The restaurants and everyone cool.
Yeah.
So keep your change. That might be another one is break your tens and then keep the change. Because otherwise the taxi will be don't have change. Thanks for the 10.
Yeah. Because that would be about how much?
10,000 is $20 roughly.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Credit. Oh, I did want to ask about credit cards. I'm guessing Visa and MasterCard are probably exclusively used. No American Express, definitely no Discover.
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. You already talked about, ATMs. I'm sure there's going to be a fee every time you pull out money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're good. So a shout out to the Schwab brokerage check card, which has 0 annual fee. And it waives your foreign ATM fees at the end of the month. So, I just traveled in December. I used the ATM about 7 times on my trip.
Nice. Okay.
I racked up $38 of foreign ATM fees.
Dude, that's pretty
and I looked at I pulled up my statement today because it's, the beginning of January. And I got the $38 all back.
Nice.
So,
not sponsored, by the way.
No, should be.
Should be. One day.
Let's talk about the water and the beach. So we coming from Northeast Ohio, we have a lot of beachgoers who go to Florida and North Carolina for a big, beautiful beach with blue water, white sand, people getting in the water and really having a beach day. Is that what we're thinking of for this coastal country?
Yeah, there are several beaches that are sandy, beautiful, And almost every hotel that is along the coast, you can like get a day pass to use their pool or their beach access. In terms of public beaches, like I kind of mentioned earlier, between the fishing and kind of water quality, there are some issues, but there are beaches you can attend. Some are pebbly, some are sand. And then if you go out to any of the islands like Gorée and Gore, they all have beautiful beaches. And those are, I mean, like an hour in a boat to any of the islands.
Okay. I did want to ask about hotels. Are you going to see your big names like Marriott, Hilton?
I think the biggest ones are the Radisson Blu.
Sure.
And then after that, I'd have to go back through. There's like Omni hotels. There's the Ibis, right? So
European
the European brands. And then after that, it's all kind of one-off hotels, which each have their own flair. Everyone knows them. They have their own restaurants. Do you have any idea like price wise for hotels? Yeah, there's a whole range,
Sure.
right? I mean, I have historically stayed at Hotel Federbe, which is like a one-off in downtown, and I think it's like $40-$50 a night.
And you have your private bathroom. There you go.
Yep. And then if you stay at the nicer ones, like the Radisson or I forget the other ones that are on the Corniche, right? That like right on the ocean. I mean, I can't even think of things going above like $300 a night.
Yeah, exactly. So very reasonable. And breakfasts, what's their breakfast like?
I'd say they're mostly kind of the French style, right? So like maybe some ham and croissants and chocolate and chocolate spread and toast and fruit and yogurt. It feels fairly European.
And there's one table with a bunch of bread and then a thing of Nutella.
Yeah. Until I get at it, then there's like a quarter thing of Nutella left.
We talked about animals already. So my last one, and then Will's got some, is like what to pack. Like, is there like one thing like, oh, I'm going to Senegal, I got to make sure I have this?
I always bring very breathable clothes that are long pants and long sleeved.
That's good.
It helps kind of regulate temperature. If you do happen to be there when it's warmer, it also helps keep mosquitoes away.
Fun.
Nice. So, yeah, I have a few questions. I'm really curious because I think, obviously with art, it's a great way to get a temperature gauge of what people are thinking in that sort of country by looking at what's being created, what people are thinking, what the artists are doing. What do you see anything like as maybe a main theme or a predominant issue that shows up in modern Senegalese art?
Wow, great question. So I think one of the things is still grappling with identity, i.e., what makes us Senegalese? Senegal, in one sense, is like a new country. It's a new construct. It'd be like asking you, like, what makes an American an American? And you're going to get 100 different answers. Yeah. So I think it's a lot of that. People who are still figuring out, are we going to have continental solidarity, right? Our Africanness, or racial, our blackness? Because, right, not all of Africa is black and not all black people are African. So I think it's just kind of teasing out these really complicated notions of identity based on what they've inherited, based on the way that the geopolitical forces, put you in this camp or in this corner. Now you're in a different space. And so across your art, across your cinema, African cinema was founded in Senegal. Like, it's all exploring these questions.
Yeah, the Senegalese movie films are... Yeah, just like you said, they're sort of the pinnacle of like African film. If you're looking for a really good modern Senegalese movie, the movie Saloum is really popular and really good. So if you're interested in seeing like a nice Senegalese movie, I think it's technically classified as horror, but it's not really horror. It's more like a adventure movie. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain. But yeah, Senegalese movies, recommend Saloum. I'm always curious, especially when you talk about Africa. In the modern day in Africa, there's a lot of Chinese influence sort of coming into a lot of African countries. I was wondering, like, when you visit Senegal, do you see some of that Chinese influence coming in?
Yeah, even between my first trip in 2010 and my one this year in 2022, there is a marked increase in the number of Chinese people who are present, who are working. The Grand National Theater that was just built was a gift from the Chinese government. And the new Museum of Black Civilization, which is incredible, was largely built by Chinese workers. But even the African Renaissance monument I mentioned earlier was built by the North Koreans. So there is a lot of kind of really interesting new geopolitical dynamics between East Asia and a lot of different places in Africa.
That's really interesting. When we did the Ethiopia episode, we were talking about Chinese influence, and one of the things that came up was that China would come in and build some of these amazing infrastructure projects, but it wasn't an opportunity for Ethiopians to get work. It was actually Chinese workers building that infrastructure. Is there like a similar situation going on in Senegal?
Yeah. I think both the Chinese and the North Koreans brought their own workers as part of it. There are obviously now opportunities now that they've gone to staff it and man it and figure out how to maintain it. But there is kind of an interesting switch in terms of when, even the way you build a building is a cultural mindset. And so if it's built one way and then you just like leave it for the other people who are local, they're like, oh, like I don't even know how this HVAC system works because it's not the way we would have done it. So there's some right, and that's what I study, right? There's like that clash of cultures and what gets made and what gets left behind.
That's very interesting. So what does like the tourism industry look like in Senegal right now?
It is a very vibrant tourist destination. A lot of, especially kind of Black Americans like to go, right? They tend to go to Ghana or Nigeria. They tend to like those because that's where they speak English, right? So Senegal is slightly trickier just with the French, but it is, like I said, with the Teranga, one of the most welcoming and like easily navigable cities. Like people are more patient. They're not going to yell at you for like not knowing what you're doing. And, I don't have the stats, but I'm sure tourism is one of the main, driving income factors for the whole nation. So whether it's going on these excursions to some of the cities and natural sites we mentioned, to hotels and restaurants and things like, I know the pandemic obviously was hard. And when I went back in May, I think there was definitely a sense of rebound and excitement to be able to visit again.
Wow. So I'm really curious. This is the last question I'm going to ask you, I think. I might have more, but this one is one that I've really been wanting to ask you. What was one of the main drivers for you to want to study Senegalese art and history? Is there a story there?
As an art historian, I will tell you, there is always a story. So I was a art history major and also added in French because I knew for grad school I was going to need languages. I had the opportunity to do a summer project with Campus Crusade and go to Senegal, but it overlapped with our semester. So I went to my French professor and I was like, I have this opportunity to go to Francophone Africa. I know you want me to go. Will you do some kind of project with me? And he agreed. So I went to Africa knowing nothing about the art because I'd studied Asian art and European art and all that. And I show up and I'm in the middle of one of these biennials with the like hundreds of exhibitions in the city. And I go home and I'm trying to write my paper and I can find so few books and articles about this nation, its artists. And then I thought, if I'm going to go do a doctorate and write a book and like be a scholar, do I want to write the like 100th book on Gothic architecture from France? Or I could write like the third book on this whole nation, which has this incredible legacy. And it's like I said earlier, it's like going home. It's so easy to go back and connect and really just be excited to give a platform to what's going on there.
Yeah, that's incredible. So it sounds like you have a book written about Senegalese art history.
I have a couple things. I have some articles, got some book. There's another book that is the big book that's supposed to be coming out in a couple years. But yeah, if you looked up my profile, Joseph L. Underwood, on academia.edu or Kent State's website or anything, you can see a full list of articles.
Man, that is amazing.
Okay, so my last question, unless you have any more, Will.
I'm good.
You're a travel agent. You're sitting behind the desk. Here comes a family. I don't know, family, couple, whatever. And they're like, listen, travel agent, we want to go to Africa. We don't want to do South Africa, Morocco, or Egypt. I just named those three because they're more popular. We want to do something a little more different. What's going to be your spin to encourage them to visit Senegal?
Yeah, I'll come back to some of the safety stats. It's one of the easiest places to get into, to get around. If you go, especially at any of these high festival times, the city is designed for a tourist to come. The food, I would say, is pretty like palpable and of similar spice levels, like maybe slightly spicier than what we're used to here in Northeast Ohio. So you're not going to be kind of like tangling with the toilet every night. It is very friendly.
Tango with a toilet.
Very friendly cuisine. And I think that sense of Taronga, you'll sense it. Even if you don't hear the word, the idea that people are excited to have you there, to show you around. You know, you when you land in a foreign place, sometimes you get the sense that you're being sold something like, oh, now go here, now go do this. And here it's much more civic pride. Like, oh, we're so excited you're here. Have you seen this yet?
Wow.
You should check this out.
That's really cool.
All right, here's my credit card. Book it.
Okay, let's go. 2024.
Ooh. I'm down.
Very cool. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for being on our show. What a fun guest.
Yes. Very
Wow.
fun guest. Yeah.
I felt in good care, in good hands.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening, guys. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us, whether it be email, onto our website. You could DM us on Instagram. We're here. We would love to answer any questions that you guys have for us. All right. Take care.
We're the travel agents, that's the end of our show.